right, thank you. It's very nice to see everyone. Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to sharing some of our thoughts related to books and metrics. Certainly, I am the director at Galter Health Sciences Library, and we do a lot of work around metrics in general. We have a metrics and impact core in the library and provide metrics consultation and support services for our university. So it's a delight to be able to talk about metrics and books. So I think we often think about metrics in the context of the author or the publisher being able to understand units of citations, units of books sold, but it's very much a quantified context when we talk about metrics. I think that there are other types of information that we need to be able to understand that can be considered in the context of a metric that can help us understand value of this kind of a resource on our campuses, in our libraries, in our communities. So typically when we think about metrics for books and book chapters, we see things, some of the usual suspects, citations, downloads, the number of people who are reading it. When we see some really terrific resources that exist now in our community, we begin to see things like the number of mentions in policy documents. That helps us get a better understanding of how knowledge is being used and applied and guiding decision making, where it's showing up in the news, Wikipedia, attention on social metrics. All of those are quantitative. We also have qualitative metrics as well. So reviews, thumbs up, thumbs down. And then we also have information which often exists in the context of narrative. So this is not machine operable information. This isn't something that you can get from some information system. So looking at those mentions in the policy document, what was the context of that? Just having it show up isn't enough. We need to know why it was there. What was the knowledge that was considered and in this policy context? And the same thing about news outlets and social media. So I actually took this screenshot from the web. This is the example book metrics. It's almost like a dashboard sort of layout of the metrics that exist in this system. And I think it begins to show us how some of these more quantifiable metrics can be distributed or can be shown in such a way to make them more than just the value. So looking at in our green box, being able to look at trend lines over time, relative context with the color wheel, social metric mentions or social media mentions over time, and then what we can't see here because of the size is a geographic indication of number of readers in a particular location. So all of those help our mind be able to consume this information in a meaningful way. But I would argue this is a great start. So I think there are lots of interesting things that we can do with this, and there's been some really interesting work and even just consideration of different things that might be important to consider whether we're able to harvest them in a machine operable way or not. I want to point out one of my colleagues when I was at Washington University, Kathy Sarley, has done some very deep thinking about scholarly products and how we understand their presence and application in scholarship. And so and this is actually a LibGuide, just a screenshot from the LibGuide. And you can see over on the left-hand side that there are a number of really terrific ideas about items that can be metrics. So for instance, has the author been invited to book signings? Has the book been included in bibliographies? And so that's a little harder to tease out. So here's my expanded list of metrics. So we have our same favorites, the numbers, the citations, the things we count. We also have attention on social media, which is important, and I'll talk about that in a minute because it is an important concept. Library holdings, so being able to go to WorldCat and get an understanding of the presence of a book in libraries, what libraries have it, the number, the relative dissemination of a book, I think can be thought of as a partner to the way we think about journals being indexed in Scopus or PubMed or Web of Science. Of course, we see things like number of awards and so on. When we go over to the qualitative side, then we begin to look at things that reflect my role in the library. So, is it being used as a textbook? Is it an open education resource? Are there online discussion resources available around that item? What kind of format is it available in? Can we get it in e-readers? What are the different kinds of features that are available in that online format so that our students can make better use of it? Not just in the library or in their classroom, but in the clinics. We're training medical students, and so we need to be able to have meaningful resources in meaningful spaces. Invited lectures, noted by organizations as having made significant contributions to a field. So you can see none of these you can easily find. This is a bit of a breadcrumb trail for an author or for a library or for a publisher to understand. Also, things like advanced praise, endorsements, context in the dedication, acknowledgments, the epigraph, ancillary products that are available with the book. Open access and open scholarship, and then I pulled out machine operable because I think this is actually probably one of the most important concepts and builds upon what Mike was talking about earlier with respect to persistent identifiers, and then machine readable metadata that allow you to be able to not only find the object itself, but also to be able to synthesize the content that is contained within that object. So, and this really is the way that I make value judgments. How much good can we get out of that resource? If it's something that I just, open up and it's a static document and our folks can't interact with it and build on that knowledge and extend to new products and new ideas, it's really the same thing as a physical book. It doesn't have that value add. So on the topic of social media, I just wanted to point out, and I realize I'm putting a plug in for something that I am an author on, but bear with me. So we had a paper come out a couple of weeks ago. This work was led by Ihsan Mohammadi when he did his postdoc in my group, and was authored also with Mike Thelwall and Mary Kwasny. Mary's with me in PrevMed over at Northwestern, and Mike Thelwall is at the University of Wolverhampton, and I know his name is a familiar one to many of us. So this paper just came out where we found, there's always been a lot of debate about social media. It's like, what does it matter? How much does a tweet count? So we decided to ask people who tweet about why are they communicating scholarly information? We found that half of the people that communicate scholarly information actually aren't in academia. These are normal people who are reading and interested in scholarly information. Most of them come from the social science and humanities background, and they use Twitter by leveraging their social ties. Motivations vary by discipline, occupation, and employment sector, but interestingly not gender. And Twitter can play a really important role in helping to connect information and people. But finally, most importantly, we thought anyway, is that the large number of non-academic users supports the claim we've all been hearing about for a number of years that tweets count as evidence for non-academic impacts of scholarly research. So this was a really interesting study. It was a lot of fun to work with colleagues on this, and since it just came out, I wanted to share it with you because we were excited about the results. So from the perspective of our local environment at the library, I think it's important to remember that we're talking about more than books and dust. So, the physical tome isn't the object that is at the forefront of our mind. We're really thinking about how do we get these resources into the spaces that our community needs to use them. And increasingly, it's not even laptops that people are accessing this information on. They're accessing it on a wide range of mobile devices and in really crazy environments. And so when publishers make an effort to make content usable in those types of scenarios, it really means a lot. So how do we make our call? So we think about a lot of things, certainly everything that I talked about before. Is it used in the curriculum? Is it easy to use? Are there different kinds of formats for different kinds of people who want to use it? Are the resources supporting our areas of priority on campus? And then, I'm sure everyone's thrilled to see this, our licensing structure and persistent access. So when we pay for something, do we get to keep it? Do we get to continue to use it? What are the updates like? So those kinds of things, it really helps us to be able to make the case to a number of decision makers on campus and advocate for resources in the library to continue to make these great resources available. So I have just a couple of questions just to, ask you all to consider. When you're thinking about metrics, is what actions should be reflected in a metric? What are you trying to measure? Who are you trying to measure? What kinds of activities are they, and who is completing these? And then also, what systems exist to capture the data? And so I use this as a shameless plug to ask for investments in systems and data, certainly persistent identifiers, but also more graph-based representation of metadata so that we can do interesting things with it. And then finally, I wanted to put one final plug in. We have an Informatics of Attribution project where we're looking at contributor roles as well as research objects, research object types that exist in scholarship as part of the National Center for Data to Health. This is an effort that was funded by the National Institutes of Health, and we're just getting started on this. But it builds on some really wonderful work that I did with Mike. We're using the NISO, some of the NISO work to build on, as well as a number of other things. And so this is really a nice mixture of culture and technology, and if there is anyone who would be interested in participating on those kinds of conversations, we really welcome you, and my information is on this slide. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'll turn the talk over to the next person, who I don't actually remember who it is. Okay. Oh, great. Wonderful.